Hello everyone and welcome to the highlight show of Clash Chess International. My name is Tatev Abrahamyan and I'm going to take you to the key moments of day 5, which was also day 1 of the semifinals. So we had two really exciting matches, Magnus Carlsen versus Levon Aronian and Fabiano Caruana versus Wesley So. So if you watched the first edition of Clash Chess, then you know that Wesley So defeated Fabiano Caruana to win the tournament. So both players have a lot of experience and they're meeting again in the same format for the second time. And of course, Magnus versus Levon is a matchup that players and chess fans always look forward to because they yield such exciting results and games. So the two matches actually mirrored each other and they had the same exact result in every round, which was unusual, but the results only tell half of the story and the games were very unique and had very many ups and downs. So let's jump right into the action. Let's check out what happened today. So let's start with our match between Magnus Carlsen and Levon Aronian. The game 1 started off really well for Levon. He was with the black pieces, but at some point things went terribly wrong for him. Let's go to move 34. So as we can see, black is doing quite well with the rooks on the second rank, and Magnus plays rook g4. And Levon grabs a pawn, which is already dangerous, and after rook e4 with seconds on his clock, you could see on camera he became very nervous. He already realized that he has blundered something, as queen f5 runs into rook f4 with mate coming, and it's not clear where to put the queen. And then he blundered again, queen h5. He takes the pawn, but now rook e6, and it's impossible to stop this checkmate without giving up a lot of material. So queen g7 would be the only move. So he resigned and give up the queen, but of course there is no reason for him to continue playing this. So this was a very unfortunate start for him, which could have been a win for him. So beating Magnus with the black pieces in the first game could have really changed the flow of the match, but unfortunately it didn't happen. So in this game, Magnus played the Alekhine with the black pieces. So it's an opening we don't see very often at the top level, and it's also an opening that doesn't have a great reputation, but Magnus tries it anyways. So let's jump to move 18. So the way Levon played this opening, he took quite a few liberties. So of course, black has this d6 pawn weakness, but in the long term, but in the short term, he does have a king in the center. So bishop e2. So he really should have played knight e3 here and black with the knight, and now he runs into some trouble. So now the king is in the center. d5, opening the center. One of the principles of chess, when your opponent's king is in the center, you want to open the center to attack the king. So knight g5, queen e7, and simply wins a piece. So Levon tries to find some resources in the position, but they're not quite there. So we reach an endgame, so let's make the next few moves and see how the game ended. So this is just a matter of technique. Magnus is simply up a piece, and the game does not last very long. A little unfortunate, but the game was already over. So this gives Magnus Carlsen a 2-point lead, which is of course very comfortable. So let's take a look at the next two games. So the next two games ended in a draw, and there's always a key thing to pay attention to when we have this kind of bishop endgame. So when your opponent has a passed pawn, of course you have to tend to it, but then if it's a corner pawn, we have to pay attention to the color of the bishop. So because it's a dark square bishop and a8 is a light square, we know that endgame is going to end in a draw. So let's take a look at what happened. So he look at the placement of the knight. So a few more moves. So not much for me to say, just to take you to the end of the game, just to show you how this game ended. So he gives up his knight and goes after the pawn. And let's move on to game 4. So let's jump to this moment in the game where Levon once again had a good position but missed a big opportunity, playing queen f2. Instead he should have played bishop f2. The knight has to go back and brought this bishop here and just simply taken a pawn. Unfortunately he plays queen f2, and the game goes on for a very long time. Let's jump to the end of the game. Let's go to move 44 and let's take a look at what happened. So Levon tries to repeat the position, but Magnus declines. But there isn't much to do for black here, so he gives up the rook for a pretty funny looking perpetual. So the normal scoring portion of the match ended, and now we enter the clutch portion, where each win is worth 2 points. Unfortunately, this part also did not go well for Levon. He lost the first game, which gave his opponent a 4-point lead, and actually this match could have gone way worse for him. So in a way, at some point the bleeding stopped, so to say. So let's go to game 5. So the first game of the clutch game. So Magnus plays h5, going after his opponent's king, and here Levon missed the opportunity to go f5. So rook h8 instead was played. King runs away, so king runs to the other side for safety, and Magnus simply plays on the king side. So the king is very safe on a3. And let's take a look at how he wins this game. Takes, and now the rook has the open h file, and the black rook cannot fight for the open file. So queen goes back, doubling on the h file, and now just penetrates. Taking a pawn. And this position is just completely hopeless. The game ended here, but g5 and the game is over. f6 is falling and b6 is falling. White is simply going to take every single pawn on the board. So now Magnus has a 4-point lead. So had he won the next game too, then 6-point lead is, even with clutch games that are worth 3 points each, I would say the match is over. It's very unlikely that Magnus was going to lose the last 2 games, and maybe even a game between that, or they were going to have 4 draws and Magnus was going to lose the last 2 games. So I think 6 points would have just basically be match over. But fortunately for Levon, Magnus plays a huge blunder in the last game, so let's take a look. So as we see, black is up a lot of pawns, which of course made Yasser Seirawan, who notoriously likes to capture pawns, very happy. And here Magnus blunders with e2, which is such a natural looking move because, you attack a rook, you assume it's going to move, and you're threatening to take on f1 with a check actually, because if you promote to knight, it's going to be a check, so your opponent will have to react to it. But then Levon has this amazing resource of queen d1, attacking the rook and threatening to queen on his own. So instead of playing e2, now that we see this queen d7 threat, the queen should have just gone back, and black is up just way too many pawns and should be able to convert this position with all these pawns. Okay, but let's go to the game. So e2 is played, queen d7, knight with a check. So it gives up the rook again, but Levon doesn't go for adventures by capturing and simply goes for a perpetual. And we end this match with a 4-point lead for Magnus Carlsen. So Magnus was actually quite happy about the level of his play and the result, of course, and Levon, he felt like he couldn't do enough to make Magnus uncomfortable and, to really cause any damage, and as he said, tomorrow he has to go berserk to try to stay alive. But let's take a look at our next match between Fabiano Caruana and Wesley So. So since I already told you that this matches mirrored each other, so you already know the result of every single game, but as I said, the result only tells half of the story. So if you're familiar with the Nimzo, he goes c5, he goes f3, which hasn't been played before. The computers hate it, computers think this is just losing, and Fabiano himself called it kind of a bluff, but it's still required for black to find some very precise moves, which Wesley did. So it goes here, sacrifices an exchange, and queen h5, bishop d3, and f6. So this is all good, so this was required for black to find to get the edge in the position. And safe to say that the experiment did not go as well as expected. But that's what happens when you take a risk, right? Sometimes things go your way and sometimes they don't. So let's jump to the key moment in the game, because the way Wesley played this game was just amazing. So let's go to this moment. So Wesley goes f5. Great move with the idea of putting the bishop on the long diagonal and starting the attack of his own. So doubling the rooks, just giving up that exchange on f6, and just playing against his opponent's king. So h5, threatening to take on g4, utilizing this pin. So knight h5, e5, opening up the position, and now key moment in the game, beautiful shot by Wesley So, taking on f3. And there's this concept in chess of attacking on the most defended square. So here we see the possibilities of discovery check, so it's impossible to take the queen. And instead he takes with the king, but after check takes the bishop, and it's impossible to hold on to this position. So taking the knight is impossible. The rook takes back, and it's a double attack on the queen and the rook. Really beautiful final move, attacking the rook. So here Fabiano resigned. The only move would be rook d1, which runs into knight g2's check, which is a very beautiful way to end the game. So the match starts 1-0 in favor of Wesley So. So Wesley So with the white pieces. So this was a long grind, and looked like it was going to be a draw for a very long time, but some chances were found. So king e4 is played. Wesley with the light pieces, so we see this king a little bit uncomfortable. So here Fabiano misses this nice shot of playing bishop f4. If you take, going for this endgame, doesn't matter where the king goes, and he should be able to draw this endgame quite comfortably. Let's say here, and the king will run in front of the pawn. Instead, in the game, he plays bishop d4. And now we see that things start to get a little uncomfortable for him, because white has a much better king against the black king. Takes the c5 pawn, defends the pawn, defends the knight, and this pawn starts rolling. The king comes back to support the pawn. So there's a lot of harmony in white's position, because all the pieces are defending each other. And here Wesley won the game because Fabiano resigned here, because it's just impossible to stop this pawn. And this harmony of these pieces is just amazing. It's impossible to attack any of them. Knight and rook are on the light square, so the bishop cannot do anything. So these games were actually quite peaceful, so not a lot of action happened. So let's take a quick look through them, and we'll move on to our clutch games, because those were the crucial ones. So in this position, Fabiano rushes with h6. Instead, he should try rook e6 and try to play this this endgame, utilizing his bishop, try to bring his king in using his passed pawn. And he goes h6, and they enter this rook endgame. So we've already seen a lot of rook endgames in this tournament. It's kind of a theme. So giving up this pawn, a very nice move. Because if the pawn takes, now we get two passed pawns on the opposite sides of the board, which becomes problematic for white. So eventually the king will have to run back, and black will take this. Instead, Fabiano takes with the king. And this is quite an easy draw. So there's no draw offer before move 60 rule, so just to end the game, he gives up a pawn to enter king and king, automatic draw, and moving on. And let's take a look at our game 4, which is the final game before the clutch games. So this game was also wasn't very adventurous. Wesley was on the better side of the draw, so here he goes f5. He could have tried with the rook a4, trying to take the pawn, but because there's a limited material on the board, still feels like black should make a draw very easily, because even once we trade a pair of pair of pawns. You know, if you go f5, f6, I will just even give up my bishop and just go to a rook knight versus a rook endgame, and that's a very easy draw. So he goes f5. So there isn't really much to say about this game. It's a quite balanced game, and we want to save our time for the excitement. And draw by repetition. Alright, and now it's time for the clutch games. So in the first game, Fabiano has the white pieces, and it looked like he was going to make a big comeback. He played the Evans Gambit, and as Wesley So noted in his post-game interview, that his opponent had a different approach to this match than in the first one. Fabiano was surprising him more in the opening, which is always an unpleasant thing to face when your opponent comes prepared and they're blitzing out all the moves, and you know, you're sitting there and you're trying to figure out what to do on move like 5 or 6 and or 10 even, and they just know everything. So that's kind of frustrating. But clearly Wesley was up to the challenge. So he plays the Evans Gambit. So if we look at this position, it just looks completely lost. Like, let's look at this, like, what is this king, right? But, you know, winning a one position is not an easy thing to do, especially when your opponent doesn't collapse. And this is what the very top players are very good at. They don't collapse, they keep the game going, and the longer the game goes, it increases the likelihood of mistakes for both sides. So in this position, Fabiano plays bishop d3. And the engine suggests, and he also said this after the game, that he should have played bishop b5, giving up the exchange, and putting the pawn on d5, and or even checking this king, chasing it away actually, even more accurate, and then taking this and just chasing this bishop away, putting a pawn on d5, utilizing this diagonal. It's really hard for black to defend this king because this knight, it's not easy to move. It invites the queen into the game. Like there's a queen, for example. Let's ignore the fact that the rook is hanging, just to show you a point. The knight cannot move because check, and now there are some problems in the position. So after the pawn goes to d5 and white gets control of the center, opens up this a1, aj diagonal on the king, this position is going to be very tough to defend. Okay. Instead, bishop d3 was played, which makes a lot of sense, right? Putting the bishop on the same diagonal as the king. So knight g5, the knight gets out. So now bishop b5, but now it's a little bit different because black consolidated a little bit. So he gives up, so black gives up the material, but manages to exchange a lot of pieces. So now, more or less, the worst is behind him, at least he's not getting checkmated anymore. It's one of the principles when you're getting attacked, you want to exchange pieces. So takes a pawn, comes back. So white is still pressing for the win. But at some point, what goes wrong for him is he kind of loses track of the game. And this can happen when you have a winning position for a long time. Like the evaluation changes, but you don't really realize it because you think your position is winning and you don't really adjust to the changes in the position. So king runs away, knight centralizes, f2 is hanging. So a couple of repetitions. And here's the crucial mistake. Fabiano goes after the h4 pawn. He should really grab the g4 pawn because check. Knight f2. And now he came to the very difficult realization that after queen e1, queen h1 is just unstoppable checkmate. So even though white was crushing through this game, he had this amazing attacking position. Some moves later, tables have turned, and now Wesley is the one with the winning attack. So queen e1, knight c5, just ignores this. The king is gonna run away from the checks, and this is impossible to stop this checkmate. And he had to resign, giving his opponent a 4-point lead. So of course that's very difficult, psychologically difficult thing to deal with, because you know you have the white pieces, you're crushing your opponent, you have this just incredible attacking position, like all your pieces are on their best squares, and then everything goes wrong and you're the one who gets mated. So now we have the final game. So Wesley So with the white pieces, so of course he's a very solid player. If he wants to keep things as they are, to make a draw, can do it very easily. So Fabiano tried everything he could, but nothing worked. So what I like in this game is this move h5, because the pawns are so weak. So he goes h5, asking his opponent how he's going to react. So he took with the knight. Of course, taking with the pawn is also possible, but then we can go f3 and then take this pawn, and the c4 pawn is actually going to be quite annoying. So instead, knight h5 was played, and now we reach this very equal position. So Fabiano tries a few things, but Wesley just goes back, defends everything. Just nothing. The position just doesn't offer enough. So they just go back and forth a few times, they find some kind of repetition, and the game ends. So great results both for Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So. So they're leading by 4 points, but as both of them, or actually four of them mentioned, the match is not over because there's still 6 clutch points to claim in the last 2 games tomorrow. And the first tiebreak of the tournament are clutch points. So if the trailing players, Fabiano Caruana and Levon Aronian, won the last 2 clutch games and the match ends in a tie, they will actually win the match to advance. So there's still a lot to play for tomorrow, so I think there's still a lot of life left in this match. You can watch the games live starting at 1 p.m. Central with commentary by Yasser Serevan, Jan Shahadi and Maurice Ashley. Make sure you check it out.